All right, gentlemen, we have a new citizenship test starting like last week. Maybe it was 6 days or 7 days ago. We have a new citizenship test, and it is longer than the original. In some ways, it is easier. In a lot of ways, it is harder than the original. And I thought it'd be fun if I compiled the brand new questions and had y'all take it, and then we could go over the answers as well as look at other parts of the test and see what's different and see what we think of the new test. Is it better? Is it worse? Is it just kind of the same in terms of quality? So I assembled the new questions. Now you'll see on the news, there was 100 questions on the 2008 version. There's 128 on the 2025 version. But on my new questions, I have 40. That is because certain sections of the test were removed altogether. Certain categories are no longer being tested. And some questions are brand new, where taking the place of original questions. So, for example, in 2008, there'd be a question about one question related to World War One. This time, we're asking a different question about World War One. So there's a couple of those cases. So we have 40 new questions on the Google form I sent you to. We're gonna break out. You guys are gonna take it. We're gonna see how it goes, and then we'll come back and we'll go over the answers and see who's the better citizen, or if you're both equally good citizens. Any questions?
Is there a penalty for not getting the majority of the questions answered correctly?
Well, it's not a felony, but I will think less of you.
Well, let's go. Let's do this.
Go.
I'm about to take the new citizenship test questions. So wish me luck. Here we go. What is the form of government of the United States? Let's say a representative democracy. It would be helpful if I knew how to spell. Representative democracy. Who elects U.S. senators? U.S. senators are elected directly by eligible voters. Let's say citizens. At one point, U.S. senators were selected by the legislature, the state legislatures, if I remember correctly.
Who appoints federal judges? That would be the president. The executive branch has many parts. Name one. The president. Why is the Electoral College important? Because it elects the president and the vice president.
Supreme Court justices serve for life. Why? U.S. SCOTUS justices serve for life to give a sense of continuity and nonpartisanship. What is the purpose of the 10th Amendment? Oh boy. The 10th Amendment. Yikes. Is that to amend the Constitution? I don't think so. Now that's a tough one. I forgot what the 10th Amendment is. So let's look it up. 10th Amendment. I should know this.
Why is it important to pay federal taxes? Because it funds the government and funding for various public services.
The American Revolution had many important events. Name one. Let's see. Oh boy, that's a good question. Not Gettysburg, that's the Civil War. Let's see. American Revolution. Say the Boston Tea Party. That kind of sparked everything. The Declaration of Independence. Why did the United States enter World War II? We were bombed at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese military.
A few moments later.
Why did the United States enter World War II? Oh, World War One. Oh, shoot. Yeah, why did we get into World War One? That's a good question. We got into World War II because we were bombed by the Japanese military at Pearl Harbor. We entered World War One to support our allies.
When was the Great Depression? That would be, or what was it? When did the Great Depression start? That'd be 1929. The Great Depression was economic, severe. It was severe economic downturn in the 1930s. Why did the United States enter the Korean War? And then also, why did the United States enter the Vietnam War? I believe they were for similar reasons due to communism, so it was the idea to stop the spread of communism in those regions, and then thus having the effect on the world, I guess, to not spread, to stop the spread of communism, to stop the spread of communism in the region. Why did the United States enter the Persian Gulf War? That question, I do not have an answer coming to my mind. As of now, it may sound silly, maybe something to do, I mean, obviously in the Middle East, and during a lot of Middle Eastern conflicts. This question, if I don't know the answer, I mean, I see how this is, I think, maybe a more difficult question than answering questions like the American Revolution or the Civil War, even like the Vietnam War, because I think those are more well-known wars. I mean, I've heard of the Persian Gulf War, but it's not one that I'm familiar with.
A few moments later.
I know I'll answer it the best I can. It won't be the correct or specific answer, but I know it has to do with Persian Gulf and thinking just geographically and maybe with oil in those countries, or I don't know the conflict, but I know, I think I may know the countries. Iraq would be one, and I think Kuwait was the other. I am only saying that because is Kuwait like an oil, state? I don't know. Iraq invaded Kuwait, but I don't know why the U.S. would enter in that, specifically why, but maybe because Iraq was not a friend of the United States, an ally, and thus they were entering a lot of conflicts in the Middle East, and people have their opinions on that. I think I'm good, so I'm going to submit this.
There we go, everyone. We are done.
All right, how are y'all feeling about it?
Decent.
Decent. That's good. That's good. I saw a little bit of Sean's, but not very much of it. And I didn't answer the question myself because I already know all the answers because I had to. The only way to look up the questions is to also look up the answers. So yeah. So as to I'll start with what's different about this test, like what was removed. There were originally a bunch of geography questions. They're all gone. Every single one of them is gone.
Really?
They got rid of that entirely.
That's disappointing.
They also got rid of all questions relating to religious freedom and checks and balances. Those were the three things that were notably removed. Hey everybody, post-production Kellen here. There was something I forgot, a very major point. I don't know how we forgot this, but there was another notable removal that may or may not a administration agenda piece, and that was there was originally a question on the 2008 version of the test as to the cause of the Civil War. And this was a long-standing question. It was not new in the 2008 version. You can find it decades prior. That question about what were the causes, because they actually accepted 3 different answers, has been removed entirely. This has been probably the most controversial removal, and I'm ashamed that I didn't call it out in the moment during the video, so I just had to come here afterwards and say something about it. Why would you remove the cause of the Civil War? Put tests on the battles. It's a little suspicious. Post-production Kellen out.
Wow.
If there was geography, that one would have been. I'm good at geography. That one.
Yeah.
Same here, yes.
Oh, it's same here. Well, they used to ask questions like, oh, name 3 states that border Canada was kind of what they were like, or name one of the 2 longest American rivers.
And most people can't do that.
I think so.
Sounds right.
No, I mean, from my experience, at least just as a college student personally, but even adults struggle with just like common states or like where places are.
They do. Being able to vote and like be a good citizen in your state doesn't necessarily necessitate that you know the geography of the country as a whole, because you can just look up a map. But I get why it was cut. But yeah, it's a little disappointing. I do find the points, and I'll touch on this again later, but I find the points about removing everything about freedom of religion and checks and balances to be a little strange to remove. All right. So the first, so the new, and do you guys notice a particular trend with the new questions added? Like any questions, any trends, any things you found interesting?
It talked about birthright citizenship. It talked about who is eligible to be a citizen and what rights they have. So that stood out for me.
I was going to say the same, and I think a lot of it touched base on like the Constitution, like amendments and stuff like that as well.
The 2 biggest expansions, statistically speaking, on this were questions about the Constitution, so amendments or specific parts of it, and history. Actually, history is almost twice as long. Most of those questions, some of them were replacing original questions, but in general, there's a lot of new history stuff. There's a much bigger emphasis on history in this one,
especially about war.
Oh yeah, that's
a lot of war.
In fact, their narrow focus on war is probably going to shank both of you in a question later on. I'll explain to you what I mean later, because it was something that got me at first. So the first question was, what is the form of government of the United States? What did you all say?
Representative democracy.
I said republic/democracy. But then when I was like taking the test, I was just like, I think I added a little bit more words as I was like narrating. So I think I said like republic, representative democracy.
Actually, that's the 2008 version. This is the 2025 version. A lot of this is kind of the same. As this is probably the section that is the least changed. And actually, this question right here, question 3 is the example of the one way that this test is actually easier. Before, they said, what does the Constitution do? And they asked you for all 3 of these answers. Now, they changed it to name one thing the Constitution does. The reason they did this is because before there were lots of different formats for questions, but now most questions are now unified to have the same format of name X number of things related to X and related to Y. X number of things related to Y. Before, sometimes they would ask you for a comprehensive list. Sometimes they'd ask you for a certain number of things. Now they always ask you for a certain number of things. It's a lot more unified that way. What was the second new question? Why do U.S. representatives serve shorter terms than U.S. senators? The lower house, the U.S. representatives, were formed to give greater input and representation to the populace on a more frequent basis, to be closer to the constituents they serve. I believe both these are right, and I believe both of these are answers that are accepted. You have to go through here for a little while. It's down here somewhere. Because yeah, that section A, like they had like one question. They did a couple changes too. Where is it? Yeah, there we go. To follow more questions. Now we're back up to speed. We had to skip through all of that because that was all about the same. So it was how many senators do each state have? 2 senators per state in the union. You know, I think I know who's typing out which answers.
Well, I know.
One of you, like Sean is going for like the gut punch. He's going for the simple answer, right? David is like speaking English premium to answer these questions.
I figure, if we're gonna, do the exam, I'm gonna explain to the audience, why I'm answering what I'm answering. So I kind of type what I'm saying. So
I think I was
That
like
makes sense.
speaking more as I was going on than writing what I wrote.
Yeah, at least the parts of it I remembered to record. I didn't. I screwed up a little bit, but it's okay. So yeah, how many how many senators are in each state? 2. Who elects them? The citizens in there. Who elects members of the House of Representatives? Citizens in their districts. These are very simple questions. They're really simple questions. I honestly am a bit surprised that they're in the way that they are, because it's like,
right.
so if one sees a ballot, you'll figure that out pretty quickly. And actually, here was something interesting. An interesting little tidbit. Let me find it in here. I think. Right. Here's kind of an example. Where is it? Right here, 19. See question 19 here. We elect a U.S. senator for how many years? 6. Now, you see, originally they would just be implicitly implied. We elect congressmen for how long? We elect senators for how long? It was actually implicitly implied in the wording of the original questions. But they changed the wording of these questions to no longer include we. It just says they are elected for how many years, in order to add these extra questions. So it was actually something that was implicitly implied in the wording of the original one, but now they explicitly test you for, which I find very interesting. In my opinion, honestly, kind of filler. The president can serve only 2 terms. Why? U.S. presidents are held to only 2 terms to limit any long-term rule. FDR was the last one to serve more than 2 elected terms. Fun facts with David Washington.
Woohoo!
Limit the power of the president from holding office too long. Let's see what answers they had. It was down here. The president can only serve 2 terms. Why? Because of the 22nd Amendment and to keep the president from becoming too powerful. Yep, I don't know if David's answer is close enough. They would probably accept it. Just because this is something very important to know about the citizenship test. It is an oral exam. It is not a multiple choice. It is not a fill in the blank where they use a scanner. You're physically speaking to somebody when you take this exam. So you can be approximately right, or even give an answer that isn't directly on the key, and you can still pass questions sometimes. Like, maybe it wasn't an answer they're looking for, but it is very obviously correct.
Well, Kellen, what does the 22nd Amendment say?
That a president can only serve 2 terms, and that is all it says. That is what the 22nd Amendment is. Again, we kind of see that focus on, hey, let's talk Constitution. What's the specific parts of the Constitution. Also, it falls, I think, very into like the traditional constitutional trap. Like if you're dissecting the Constitution, to only focus on the amendments, because they talk a lot about amendments in this, but they never at any point talk about articles in either test, which is interesting. It's like, if we're going to be so specific about the Constitution, why are we only on the amendments instead of the actual original component document? It's very interesting, at least in my opinion. Who appoints federal judges? The president and the president. This is correct because the president does that. The executive branch has many parts. Name one. The presidency and the president. We love the president here. There's all kinds of things. Let me scroll down where we are. Yeah. So the only answers they would accept were the president, cabinet, or federal department and agency. So at least those are the ones that they listed out. I keep clicking on the 2008 version. Why is the Electoral College important? This is an interesting one too because it's kind of ancillary in a lot of ways. Like it is a component part of the government, but I find this to be an interesting question because yes, they do decide who elects the president. You guys are both right here again. You guys are both very good citizens that way. But it's kind of ancillary to the point because in nearly all states, except for like a few now, I don't remember the exact number. I need to look it up. Electors are bound to vote for a certain candidate when appointed. So, let's just say, in Florida, I don't believe we can have faithless electors in Florida. If the people of Florida elect Donald Trump in 2020-24, an elector is bound by law to vote for Donald Trump. There's no choice in the matter at all. So it's honestly, in my opinion, kind of an ancillary question because in nearly all cases, the people select the electors and the electors select the president. So they're not as important as they used to be. They're still important, but not as important. What is one part of the judicial branch? David and Sean swapped places. Now David is using the shorthands, and Sean is using the Supreme Court.
I've always liked the acronym SCOTUS.
SCOTUS is nice. I love SCOTUS.
So Latin and so official.
Yeah, let me scroll through here. Okay. How many Supreme Court justices are usually needed to decide a case? The majority of sitting justices, there are 9 justices in total. I think the answer they were looking for was 5, David.
I said the majority of the sitting justices because a judge can recluse themselves.
This is true. They can recluse themselves. And also, a fun fact that I think this is a weirdly not known fact, but Congress can just change the size of the Supreme Court whenever they want. Right. And they have before. Originally, there were only 5 justices in the Supreme Court. And at one point, I think there were 11 at one point. Or was it 13? Yeah, it was 11, I think.
11, I believe.
Yeah, that was in like the 1880s, I think.
Wait, Kellen, you said the Congress or is it the presidency? Doesn't the
it's both.
The appointment?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. So I mean, it's a bill that is passed though. The OG one was the Judiciary Act of Marbury v. Madison fame. And Congress can actually pass a law that says, okay, this is how many justices will be on the court, and then the president signs that into law. So even though they say 5, majority of sitting justices is probably the more formally correct answer. And the other thing is they say usually need to decide a case because also sometimes there can be a plurality opinion where there isn't actually a majority. But there's just an opinion that has the most support. So sometimes there's 3 separate positions. That'll be a thing. How long do Supreme Court justices serve? Lifetime service or lifetime? And in this one, it says lifetime appointment, or until retirement, which is all correct. Now, why do Supreme Court justices serve for life? To be independent of politics and to limit outside influence. What do we see here? SCOTUS justices serve for life to give a sense of continuity and Interesting E there, David.
Sorry about that. Partisanship. That should be an A.
And to be impartial to politics. And this is right. The whole idea was, you could have a more independent judiciary if there was no time pressure for them to push anything. What is the purpose of the 10th Amendment? The black sheep of the Bill of Rights, because it is an important amendment. I mean, not as much these days. It used to be really important. But it's like that weird part of the Bill of Rights that is not really that much to do with any of the rest of it. Any rights not in the Constitution that is prescribed to the federal government is therefore a right of the states to determine. Yep, reserving power to the states over the federal government, or in some cases to the people, is what it says.
I must admit, I struggled with that one.
I did too. I was just trying to.
Yeah, 10th Amendment's it's a weird amendment, and it's especially interesting to bring this up now because the 10th Amendment, while it's not completely dead, it's not really as respected as it used to be. It's not like the the trap card that it used to be. It used to be a really important driving factor in how a lot of decisions were made with the court, but not anymore. It's just kind of in the background now. It's kind of it's not in like the tier of the Ninth Amendment, but it's pretty close to where it's like we don't really pay attention to this amendment. So it's very interesting to bring this up. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this is just because a lot of Republicans, the 10th Amendment's pretty big within the Republican establishment fame, and I wonder if that's seeping down here.
I think you're right in regards to that, given that the debate amongst federal government, well, the constitutional scholars and politicians in regards to, what is a state right that's not enumerated in the Constitution and what is a federal right that's not explicitly enumerated in the Constitution. I think that's a very good question that they added in there.
Yeah, it's one of the tougher ones on the whole exam, I think, because nobody pays attention to that amendment very much anymore. Who can run federal elections, run for office, or serve on a jury? It's U.S. citizens. Good job, guys. How can people become U.S. citizens? Birthright and naturalization. Although according to some, the 14th Amendment does not mean birthright citizenship. Interestingly, there we go. 68.
And did that case already go before the Supreme Court?
I don't know. Let me look this up. Oh, of course, they were non-committal. Amazing.
Right. They limit the use of or the effectiveness of injunctions against the president. Right.
That's interesting. So nothing has, but in effect, it did nothing.
Right.
I see. So what I would guess is politically they didn't want to draw any ire, but they also didn't want to, because there's not really a good originalist argument to why you can't have, why the 14th Amendment doesn't mean birthright citizenship. There's a lot of history, a paper trail a mile long to show that was the explicit intention of the words. And that, of course, and it was taken to mean that for hundreds of years. And that is very important to the justices on the court, at least the conservative justices, that kind of reasoning. And to answer anything but, birthright citizenship kind of being the implication kind of goes against, at least from my understanding, kind of goes against their judicial methodology. So they kind of couldn't side with Trump on that, like realistically.
Right. Kellen, if I remember correctly, they reserved the right to rule on that or give a decision on that issue later in this term.
Oh, I did not know that. Thank you.
What
is one way Americans can serve their country? Military service, civic service, and volunteer, or to serve in the military? They asked for one. David gave them 3. Yeah, they said vote, pay taxes, obey the law, serve in the military, run for office, and work for local, state, or federal government is what they said.
Right.
Serve your country, obey the law.
There you go.
Nice and simple. Anybody can do that one usually. Where were we? Why is it important to pay federal taxes? To fund our military and social security, because it funds the government and funding for public services. There's so many different ways to word this. I'm curious what they say. It's required by law. Yes, that's all people pay to fund the federal government. Required by the U.S. Constitution, the 16th Amendment, and that's your civic duty. Your guys' reasons were very, because taxes fund important things. This one just said, because we'll beat you up if you don't. In fact, required by the U.S. Constitution for the 16th Amendment. I think it's a very ineloquent way of wording it, unless I'm forgetting the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. It doesn't actually require that you pay taxes. It gives the government the permission to lay taxes if they want, or lay income tax if they want. I mean, they could always do tariffs and land sales and things like that.
And that's for debate as far as does the president have the right to levy tariffs? That was heard in front of the Supreme Court recently.
Yeah. the Congress has always had that power. Now it's the question of whether or not the president has, and the answer is
Mhm.
probably not. The American Revolution had So what did they fight to win independence? Written the Revolutionary War. Good job, you guys are so smart. You guys both got this answer wrong, and I bet you're wondering, Kellen, how is that possible? Because they use the terms, and this happens twice. They use the terms American Revolution and Revolutionary War interchangeably. They are synonyms on this
Right.
text,
Okay.
which I think is because they say American Revolution is the name of the war, not the name of the full movement. It's the name of the war and the war only. And you can kind of see it in here. They say Bunker Hill. Actually, no, Sean got it right.
Right.
Declaration of Independence. Sean got it right.
I got it
David-
right too. I said Declaration of Independence, didn't I?
Oh yeah, you did. You got it right. I saw Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party is wrong
Yes.
because they're not counting anything before the war, which I find very.
I was thinking Bunker Hill, but it didn't come to mind. But
Personally, I find it so strange that you wouldn't include some of the events leading up to the war, because
right.
the American Revolution in broad happens both before the war, during the war, and shortly after the war. I mean, you kind of see it a little bit here. Why did we declare war? And they give you all these reasons.
Mhm.
But I still think that these things, like I think the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, I feel like those are parts of the American Revolution in broad. I think if they said American Revolutionary War, this question would be a good question. But as it is, it's like, I think there's a bit of a verbiage flub there.
Okay.
And also I kind of question, this is actually a thing I have, a little beef I have with a couple questions. Why is this so important? Like genuinely, like why is, they fought at Bunker Hill or maybe Reed's Hill, who knows? Or they fought at Saratoga, or they were camped at a place called Valley Forge and it was very, very cold. I feel like this is almost ancillary information. This right here, why we declared war, this matters so much to me.
And maybe it was that other question is focusing on the who instead of the what. You know what I'm saying? Who was there? Why were they there? We already know. But the important events is more the who, so to speak. That's how I took the question as I see it now. Who was at Bunker Hill? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's what you're saying. The answer is almost all of these was George Washington.
Yeah.
And actually, it's the answer for all of these. George Washington. They have that in common. Shout out to Washington. I'm not a big fan of this question, mostly because of the wording. But yeah, that's probably my least favorite of the new questions. Thomas Jefferson is famous for many things. Name one. He was a president. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. These are things that he is so famous for.
Yeah.
James Madison is famous for many things. Name one. Federalist Papers contributor and father of the Constitution. I got to give both you credit. Neither of you said president.
We didn't want to be redundant.
Yeah, but here's an example of one of the things that makes this test harder. There were 13 original states.
Yes.
Name 5. This was not a question I had. Now, this question is also on here, but there's a key difference. It's down here somewhere. I don't want to scroll straight past it. It says name 3.
Oh, okay.
And this is something that happens in every single one of these questions, except for the cabinet position question. Every one of these questions in the original test where they ask you to name X amount, they just raise the amount. Almost always by 2. Which is very interesting. But yeah, nearly all of these, they just raise the amount. So before you only have to name 3, now you have to name 5. Does it make it much easier or harder? I don't really know.
I mean, I think that question in itself is fair to name 5 original states. I don't think that's too difficult, but maybe for another question where it's naming 5 of something, it could be more difficult.
And also because they took the geography questions out.
Yeah.
Perhaps this is making up for it because, okay,
Maybe.
it does give those who are taking the test takers opportunity to show their geography
Yeah.
acumen.
Yeah, their knowledge of states a little bit more. That makes sense. That makes sense. The another example I could think of was this test has you name all three branches of government. The original only asked you to say two out of three,
Really? Hmm.
which I find a little odd. It's like if you know two of them, surely you know the third one, right?
Exactly.
How many people learn just two? I found that kind of odd. I mean, don't really think it's a big deal either way, but found that interesting about the old test. Alexander Hamilton is famous for many things. Name one. That musical, did so much for him. He made it all the way to the citizenship test. First Secretary of President, first Treasury Secretary. That's what you both said. And he shot Aaron Burr. No, Aaron Burr shot him, David. And then he escaped out west. And then Jefferson let him escape out to the west. And then he married a rich widow and then screwed up her money on land speculations. Aaron Burr is a strange character. One of the weirder characters we had in our history. The Civil War had many important events. Name one. Gettysburg, surrender of the Appomattox Courthouse and the 14th Amendment, and then the Emancipation Proclamation. I think these are all right. I don't remember if they included 14th Amendment. So I think that happened.
Was a typo.
Did you? What do you mean?
I think I went back up to the wrong question and started typing my answer. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, the 13th Amendment was a thing, but the 14th Amendment actually happened after, so I guess they wouldn't accept that. But yeah, all those things you named are accepted, and I appreciate this question more than the Revolutionary War simply because there's more answers, and also two of them were things that are not linked to battles.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are very important to note, and I think this, and also the fact that there's no question about what they're referring to. So I think this is a better version of that Revolutionary War question, a better version of it. This is how it should have been the whole time.
It's pretty explicit.
What amendment says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are U.S. citizens? The 14th Amendment, baby. And this is what's been up for debate lately when we're talking about birthright citizenship. When did all men get the right to vote? The answer they were looking for was not men and women. They were looking for men specifically. And this is in 1870, after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, or with the ratification of the 15th Amendment. So David, you actually you would have gotten this question wrong unless they were like, oh, no, that's all men and women. But then again, I think you're in a setting where you're doing an oral exam, you could probably ask for clarification. Probably. I don't know exactly how it works. So why did the United States enter World War I? To support our allies and because Germany attacked the U.S. and allied ships. These are both answers that are accepted in this. And actually, they didn't used to ask this question again. It used to be who was president during World War I, which I think is a weak sauce question. I actually like this question better. Although one thing I will say is I think could potentially be added was the Zimmerman telegram. You could add that to the list as well, because that was an intercepted communication between Germany and Mexico, where Germany tried to persuade Mexico to go to war with the United States. And that was kind of the last straw. Even though with all the rest of this, it probably wouldn't have happened. And without that, it probably still would have happened anyways. But I still think it would. I still think it earns a place in this answer bank, but it doesn't. It's not in there. I would appreciate it if they did. So when did all women get the right to vote? 19th Amendment, 1920.
I was 1 year off.
You were close. You were real close. So what was the Great Depression? Severe economic downturn, I believe, is the correct answer.
Yes.
Yep. David, you're not a very good citizen right now.
It's that period in time that is just, traumatic for me.
Yeah. So when did the Great Depression start? 1929 is the simple answer. Look at that. 2 correct responses, and it put it in a chart. An
Nice.
interesting thing that I would like to know is the 2 answers they gave are historically disputed, which is the fact that the crash itself was the cause.
Right.
Now, historically, that's how a lot of historians see it. But more recently, we've seen a very different interpretation that describes the crash more as a symptom rather than a cause, because not that many people were that invested in the stock market. It just happens. It just so happens that a lot of people who had stocks, like money in stocks, were rich enough to get in the newspaper over it. But what was really causing the Great Depression was the banking system. The banking system was bad, and when people went to get their savings, because there was a lot of other related factors, the bank shut down, the money evaporated, and that was really what started. So I think this question was 1929 is perfectly fine answer, but only saying stock market crash is a little questionable, in my opinion. So that was an interesting one. Why did the United States enter World War II? Pearl Harbor, baby. But they say Pearl Harbor, support allies, oppose our enemies. Nice, simple bread and butter. Who was their main rival during the Cold War? The Soviet Union or USSR. That's an easy one. I think this is also. I'm kind of surprised this question wasn't on the original. Wasn't on the original test.
Right.
Because I feel like even by 2008, like it was very important to know, and it still kind of affects foreign policy today in small ways. Why did the United States enter the Korean War? To stop communism. Why did they enter the Vietnam War? To stop communism. Actually, both these answers to these questions are the exact same, which I find very funny in a way.
Yeah, when you look back on it.
And when they say Korean War, surely they mean the Korean police action, because we never declared war. Same with the Vietnam War, we didn't declare war on either of these.
The Korean conflict.
Yes, and I think this is why the questions weren't originally on.
Isn't that why people say, or I don't know if that's anymore, but people said it's technically ongoing, the Korean War, or was that a few years ago until like maybe they broke or something? I don't know, but people always say that it's technically ongoing because it was.
Yeah, because North Korea has always still been at the war, and South Korea has always still been like, in defense mode, but they've never actually been doing much.
Yeah.
But we haven't actually declared war on anybody since we declared war on Japan in World War II. That was the last time we formally declared war on anybody, which I think that's why these conflicts were not on the original test, because they weren't recognizing them as wars, because technically speaking, they weren't supposed to be, but de facto they were. I actually do think this is a more honest portrayal of history, though. I'm gonna hold back on something else. I'll say that later.
It's just said
oh, here we go. David, you were there.
I was there. Jeez.
You were there, David.
I totally forgot that I mean, there's 2 Iraq wars, for my generation. The first Gulf War, with Bush Sr. and the second Gulf War. And so my mind is stuck in the second Gulf War.
Wait, so was I correct? Because I said Iraq.
You won, Sean. You won.
But I didn't know. I just said because I knew I was thinking the Persian Gulf and I knew Kuwait and then Iraq, but I didn't know what did it have to do with oil specifically, why Iraq invaded Kuwait and then we entered on their behalf, on Kuwait's behalf or something.
Yeah. We entered on Kuwait's behalf because Iraq was was not an ally, it was an adversary.
Right.
Kuwait was an ally. And I think oil was a small component, but oil was a bigger component with the second Gulf War, which is normally referred to as Iraqi freedom.
Right. However, when we protested the first Gulf War, We talked about, or the argument was that, Iraq invaded Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein made the argument that Kuwait was drilling into Iraqi territory and stealing oil, and so that's why Saddam Hussein's forces went into Kuwait. And so for us, and I remember, being in DC and protesting the war, it was always about, oil and that's just from our perspective, the demonstrators. For, the administration, it was about, freeing, liberating Kuwait.
Yeah. We this was something we talked about before recording, but in our generation, Sean and I, we're not really taught about the Persian Gulf War, the first Gulf War. We're taught a little bit more about the war on terrorism and whatnot, but we're not really taught about the first one, other than that it was short, it was between Iraq and Kuwait, and we were liberating Kuwait. What actually caused the war, why they invaded, wasn't really taught to us, and most of the specifics about how the country felt was not really said either. So thank you for that insight, David, because you were there.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So name one conflict: Afghanistan. You guys are really on the same page. But yeah, here we have the war on terror, Afghanistan, and Iraqi freedom. So there we go. Or the second Persian Gulf War, or the war in Iraq, or whatever you want to call it. Has a lot of names. This was a question I found interesting. Yeah, name one example of American innovation. It was the automobile and the light bulb. And this one was kind of interesting because I think they should have said technological innovation. I could see some people being confused because one could argue we had a lot of civic and governmental innovations. But that's not what they're talking about. They're only talking about technology. So I think they could have been more specific, but it seems like you guys knew what they were trying to say. I feel like the light bulb in the car, like the two people come to, but these are also all really good examples as well. And I like this question in the sense that they had a nice spread of different answers. They went for, fairly early on to quite recent. I think that was a good play by them. Lastly, we have the symbols and holidays. The nation's first motto was E pluribus unum. What does it mean? Of many one, or out of many one? This is a good question. Out of many one, or we all become one. You guys, I think David's answer would still be accepted, because it's a clear understanding of de facto what it means, even if it's not an exact correct translation. I think they would still accept that. And now they also added, because this is worth noting, they actually separated holidays into its own section. Before, there was just a section called integrated civics. It was just like a hodgepodge section. That's where the geography was. Now they've separated it out a little bit more. Before, it used to be when do we celebrate Independence Day, and name I think it was 2 national holidays. But now they actually went out of their way to say, what's the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day? I will say it's for the purposes of doing your civic duty, which is really what this test is supposed to be about. It's your ability to do your civic duty. This is entirely unnecessary to know, but in a small way, it's a lot of people conflate the two.
Yes.
So I do understand, even if I think it's unnecessary, I do understand actually why they included it. And yeah, those are the brand new questions. Again, there's a number of questions that are just modifications. In fact, there's a lot of cases of them taking contrapositive questions. Let me see if I can find one where they would take a question and they would just do it Jeopardy style in the new one, where they would take the answer from the previous, put it in the prompt, and then prompt a different answer that's closer to the question from the original. It's a very weird thing. I don't know why, other than I just don't know why. What's an example? For example, they would ask, what is an amendment? It's a change or an addition to the Constitution. In the new one, they say, how do you change or amend the Constitution? Amendments. And there's more examples than just that, but that's the most immediate example that comes to mind of, okay, we're going to take the same question and we're going to reverse it. So very cool citizenship test. You both did very, very well. I would expect no less because, involvement, we're more civically involved than most people. I think naturally we would know better than most. What were your all thoughts on the new questions? What do you think of them?
I like the fact that again they asked for 5 answers for the geography, the original 13 states. So they, although um, they don't have the geography section anymore, it looks like they incorporated that in the other sections, like stating what were the
Mhm.
13 name 5 of the 13 original states.
I'll have you know that is the only question related to
Um,
geography left. That is the only one. There is no other one. That is
no,
it. That
no
is
other
it.
ones.
That is it.
Wow.
Every other question is gone. That is the only one that survived.
Wow, that's too bad.
So
That's
that
too
question
bad.
so that part may as well be gone.
Right. Well, it's good to know all 13 original states. So
Sure.
that's a good start. That's too bad because we do have an issue with geography, not
Okay.
understanding our geography here in the United States. I like the history part. There's a lot of war. Damn,
A
a
lot
lot
of
of
war.
war.
In fact, it's
And
most in it is now the majority of it is war, which is interesting.
right. And to separate the Veterans Day and the Memorial Day, it's good to have that clarification.
Mhm.
Memorial Day, we memorialize those who have fallen, those military who have fallen. And then Veterans Day, of course, honoring our vets. Uh, but however, it does lean into military and military service.
It does.
Sean?
I definitely agree with everything that David shared. I think overall it's fair. I don't think it's too drastic. I think a lot of the differences that you highlighted were maybe like semantics or just slight variations in wording. I personally found it not too difficult. I mean, some questions I had to think about more, but I think these are questions that you should know or hope to know, right? Like, and even people who live within this country don't know, who are citizens. Um, I think that I agree with the geography. I personally think there should be more geography questions, not just, one naming the original um, states. I think it has to include more geography because that to me is something that I've just personally experienced in everyday life, like referring to certain places, and people will think that a state is a city and vice versa. And it's just surprising actually. So I think that's interesting. And yeah, a lot of war question. I think some of the war questions are quite fair and quite straightforward. um, American Revolution, Civil War, um, even the World Wars, and Vietnam and Korean, or if they are wars or not.
Mhm.
But something like the first Persian Gulf War, like I found that to be a little difficult and not something that even I mean, I guess I did get it right, but I didn't know the full context of it. So if they
Yeah.
were asking anything more than I guess the acceptable answer, that could be a little bit that I would find difficult. So
Yeah.
but
I I
I think overall it's still a fair test.
yeah. Yeah, it's still very learnable and on paper, and of course on paper, this is all stuff you learn in high school, except maybe the Persian Gulf War, and a couple things about the judiciary, because they don't dive high schools don't tend to dive deep into that, even in like advanced placement courses. Aside from like those like 4 or 5, generally, this is stuff that a high schooler would know. It is worth noting that only 1 in 3 Americans were able to pass the 2008 version. This version is, which is I think a very sad reflection. And this version is much harder. except for, again, there's some questions that are easy. Like, for example, they used to ask you, what was Susan B. Anthony famous for? Now they'll say, name any, you know, you know, women's suffrage leader. They'll say, name anyone, and that will work. So, in some ways, in some small ways, it is easier. There's fewer formats, which is nice. That way you don't have to, like, generally you have to get an overview on everything. It's very rare that you have to do a comprehensive list, which is very nice. I think it's way more in depth. I think they did a lot of corners, like things like electoral college, which was not considered important knowledge for the 2008 one, is now considered important knowledge. Some of these additions I do question a little bit why they were super necessary, because again, I think the point of a citizenship test is, citizens have responsibilities, they have duties. So they need to know how their government works, they need to know what their place within the government is, as well as some basic skinnies on American culture. That's mostly what you got to know. I think knowing individual battles in most cases doesn't constitute important knowledge. Again, I liked the version of it in the Civil War because they include stuff that wasn't battles. I don't like the American Revolution question because of the way it's written. And again, I think it's very strange to remove, the questions about religious freedom and checks and balances. I find that a very strange exclusion, especially because in most cases, this test seemed to want to go more in depth into every corner. And I think removing that, and again, this could be me putting on my tinfoil hat, but it screams very agenda to me, just given, the current administration is more overtly Christian than they were previously. There's been this kind of push in a lot of states recently to make Christianity a bigger focus of government, and I think there's also been in the current government this increasing idea, and this was actually true of the previous administration too. This increasing idea of the executive branch bleeding into the others more. Because you saw you saw this with both Biden and Trump, where they would each do executive orders where they would overreach their power, and do Congress's job instead of their job. And so I'm very upset that question was removed. I'm very upset about that because I think it's a very important thing we need to be reminded of. And I think this test wanted to not remind us of that very deliberately. But as a whole, I mean, the test, it still is pretty fair. I think that, and when it comes to why we have the new test, there's this concern of like, people coming into our country, do they know enough about, our country to, be citizens? It was kind of the most common argument I saw. I've seen other ones too. That's the most common argument I see. But if 1 in 3 natural-born Americans can't answer the old test, is our concern really with the immigrants? I don't know. I
That's
think
an
if
indictment of civic education here in the United States.
Oh, it is. We need to do better in our
Sarah.
education. And I think if we're really concerned about, whether people going out to vote know what they're voting for, we got to focus on the natural-born Americans. They're the ones that are screwing up hardest. Again, I don't mind this test the way it is right now, but I think if we're going to, heighten our standards for what immigrants got to do to become citizens, I think maybe we need to heighten our standards for people who already are citizens.
Well, Governor DeSantis did, whether it was a law that was passed or he did some executive action that required civics be taught back in school. So that's a good start.
Yeah,
it's a very good start.
There's some good starts. I think, again, there's more we can do, and I think a lot of the problems are fundamental within all corners of the education system. It's just civics are one of the most unfortunately impacted sections of it.
I have heard that. Oh, sorry. I heard
No,
that a lot of the reason why maybe civics is not such a focus in education, especially like in primary education or through high school, they found it not necessary and not important, which is also ironic because voting is being told as it's important, right? Yeah. But in order to vote and make informed, conscious decisions and how that affects the government, how that affects you directly and your state and your local, government, and then the country as a whole, and then also internationally. I mean, you have to know civics and these questions and related questions and how that all works. So I think if voting is being taught and promoted as what how that is important for us to do, then it should go hand in hand. Well, okay, well, it's important that you also understand the functions and processes of this country, and even the history of this country is so important. And I just feel that over the years that's sort of waned out. And you mentioned even like advanced placement courses in high school. Like I took AP in high school, and we were just more taught for like the test. It wasn't as much as like knowledge of different wars and this and that. It was just, this is something that could fit for this answer. And I feel like even for this test, like it was asking, like it had multiple, like some of them had multiple answers you could give, and it was just like maybe like a one word answer or just like a phrase. But there's so much more context that I think can even go outside of this that should be taught. And not that it necessarily impacts like your every single decision and your day to day as a human being, but like as an American citizen, when you're voting and you understand how some politicians may feel about certain um, parts of our country and government, like as you mentioned, Kellen, like maybe you feel that like an agenda with like the new test because of like the previous, like this administration, the previous administration, just like the hot topic issues and button issues like around elections. So it's important to understand what that means when you're actually hearing that in conversation and discourse.
Yeah, I don't, and for the record, I don't think there were very many examples of agenda. I think the two removals were the most obvious, were the most glaring,
Yeah.
and the only other one I can think of where I was like, okay, maybe they're pushing agenda was the question about the Supreme Court, why they serve lifetime appointments, because the idea of term limiting judges has been gaining traction recently. So I think they might have added that question as an indictment against that as well. I think those are the only three examples that I personally saw where I was like, okay, I feel like maybe, I feel like maybe. And then arguably the why does president only serve 2 terms, because now Trump and Johnson have said that he's not running for a 3rd term, or he's not going to attempt to add an amendment or anything. At the same time that this test was updated. That could have been a coincidence. It might not be a coincidence. I don't really know. I'm not going to pretend to know. But that's, so 3 examples, maybe a 4th, but we have no way of knowing. But yeah, I think if we can make a good pivot towards, going harder on our civic education, I think this is a good test. I think these are good updates to test. I think if we don't, then this was mostly unnecessary. With a couple pieces out, like, okay, that should have been on there from the beginning.
I think this test should be given to for entrance exams for colleges. You have to take SAT or ACT and know about math and English and reading skills. Then I think there should also be a civic portion, because honestly, that may be one of the most important parts of college. So I think that would actually, I think, as you mentioned, if like only 1/3, right, of Americans can answer these questions, I think, yes, personally, we should raise the standards for immigrants coming to this country, but we should also have standards for our own American citizens. So if the goal is to have, the best population and an educated population of either new citizens or current citizens, then it should go both ways. And I think it should be for colleges and universities as well, in order to, just as a college student, it's very funny to see, and not even in very basic answers too, just like clueless, like not that I consider myself the utmost like scholar in this, but these I feel are still very basic questions that many people, college students, adults, high schoolers struggle with.
It'd be good to know. And it's worth noting as well, you don't have to, in order to pass the citizenship test, this is both for the old one and the new one, you don't have to know everything on it. The original, you would get 10 random questions out of 100, and you would have to get 6 right. This new one, you get a sample of 20 out of 128, and you have to get 12 of them right. So I guess the fact that people still usually failed is maybe a bigger indictment, maybe a bigger one, because because a lot of the knowledge, like David got a couple answers wrong, still passes by a country mile. Country mile.
In
So,
Florida, or is the Florida Constitution, in the U.S. Constitution, exams still required in high school or grade school? Really?
No, the Florida Constitution is no longer taught at all. At least when I went there, it was not taught at all. Other than the fact that Florida has its own constitution. That was the only thing we really had to know about it. It was that states have their own constitutions, their own rules. That wasn't something that was tested on, period. Which I find which again, I find very sad. It's like, when you vote for president, you should always vote for president first off. Like, this statement should not be taken as a don't vote for president. But your vote for president as an individual does not make a big difference. You don't move a needle on a presidential election. But on a city election, on a county election, on like a state rep, that kind of election, your vote makes a huge difference. You and even just like the small people in your circle, your vote actually can represent a whole lot. Like we discussed this, last Saturday when we were talking about the Orlando city election. The turnout there is usually less than 15%. Imagine if there's less than 15% of the city are voting, and keep in mind the city of Orlando is not actually all of the city of Orlando. It's a smaller portion of it. It's mostly just the downtown area. If even just a handful more people, it's like small groups of people voted more in those elections, that would move the needle. It would. And so I don't know why our civic education doesn't more focus on how you can make a difference in your local scene. It's all, what is the 10th Amendment? And I'm like, I don't know. Who cares? The court doesn't care.
To have more civic education regarding your state, your local governments. I wasn't taught state constitution in New York. Just that again, each state has their own constitution, but it would be very interesting. I don't know every single the difference between different states and their constitutions. Like I know that there would be
they're crazy
differences, but I don't know the differences.
Some of them are obnoxiously long. That's one of the main differences. Mm-hmm. You should look up the Alabama Constitution. That thing is terrifying. And it got shortened recently by hundreds of pages, and it's still too long.
Funny.
So there's a whole interesting world of civics that's often untapped. But I think this was very fun. I think this was a good activity, and kind of got to look more and see, what are people entering a country, or rather people who are applying for naturalization, what do they have to know these days? I think this was a very good exercise. And of course, we proved once and for all, David and Sean are good citizens.
All right.
Yeah. If you made it to the end, again, thank you very much. This has been a very long video. So if anybody actually values our opinions long enough to watch for this long, or just our test answers for this long, we're all very flattered. Thank you very much. If you aren't subscribed, please do. We're now making this a series. We're now going to try to do a new group video. We're going to record every Saturday, and then upload sometime in the coming days, depending on when I get to editing it. Just depends on my schedule.
I like this, particularly in regards to the Constitution, and with the debate that we're having over the Constitution and the executive branch overreach, the birthright citizenship, tariffs, who has the authority. It's good that we got back to the basics and look to see what exactly new citizens are required to know about our Constitution and about the law of the land. So this was a good idea. I appreciate it.
Stay tuned the next episode where I quiz David and Sean, and maybe other people too, on every single line of the U.S. Constitution.
Oh my
Just kidding, I'm not doing that. Maybe one day we'll do a constitutional trivia. Maybe.
That would be cool. Have some prizes or something. That would be very cool.
I would want someone else to make it though. I want to be in on that. They wouldn't make it. want to be a part of that. Plus, I feel like I'd be annoying as hell if I made one. I'd be like, what does the 20th Amendment do? And you'd be like, who cares? Anyways, this has been the J&Washington team, and we thank you for watching, and have a nice day.